The lights outside the studio were still blazing when the whispers began to spread. The drama had wrapped filming for the day, the cast had smiled through rehearsals, and the production crew had packed up their equipment with the usual laughter. But behind the heavy velvet curtain, inside the quiet dressing room that smelled faintly of makeup and freshly ironed costumes, something completely different was happening, something no one was ever supposed to see. Tan Songyun, the actress whose warmth and bright smile had captivated millions, was sitting alone in front of the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, but her usual sparkle was gone. Instead, her eyes brimmed with tears, her shoulders trembled, and her lips pressed together as if holding back the storm threatening to break. It was supposed to be just another night on set, just another day of playing a character that audiences would later fall in love with. But behind the mask of professionalism, Tan Songyun's heart was fighting battles the cameras never captured. And in that fragile moment, the whispers began, the whispers that spread through the narrow hallways, echoing louder than any spotlight. What caused Tan Songyun to break down that night? What words were exchanged in that dressing room that no one was supposed to hear? And why did her quiet sobs feel like the beginning of a story no one could ever fully erase? The truth of that night starts with silence. The crew had just wrapped, and Shu Kai, her co-star for the project, had already stepped out to greet the director. Laughter filled the hallway, people congratulating one another on a particularly emotional scene. But Tan Songyun, instead of joining, slipped quietly into her dressing room. The door closed behind her with a soft thud that no one paid attention to. Inside, she let out a breath she had been holding in for hours. Her makeup was still intact, her costume still perfect. But her heart? It was shattering. She picked up a small note from her vanity table, something she had found tucked beneath her script earlier that day. No one knew who left it, and at first, she thought it was just another prop. But the words written in elegant handwriting had pierced her deeper than she imagined. Not everything you hide will stay hidden. They will find out sooner or later. It wasn't signed. It wasn't dated. It was simply there, staring back at her, mocking her. She read the words again and again until they blurred with her tears. Whoever wrote it knew something personal, something fragile, something she had tried so hard to bury beneath her smile. Her hands shook as she placed the note back on the table. For weeks, she had been carrying weight no one on set knew about. The pressure of fame, the rumors in the media, the loneliness of being misunderstood, everything pressed down on her until the walls of her dressing room felt too small, too suffocating. And then the whispers came. Not loud voices, but faint footsteps and murmurs just outside the door. She froze, wiping her tears quickly, but the cracks in her voice betrayed her. "Songyun, are you okay?" The voice was soft, hesitant. It belonged to someone from the makeup team who had returned to collect a forgotten bag. She hadn't realized anyone would still be around. She turned her chair slightly, her smile trembling as she forced composure. "I'm fine," she whispered, though the redness in her eyes said otherwise. But the makeup artist didn't believe her. She lingered, her hand still on the doorknob, watching as Tan Songyun tried to mask her vulnerability. The silence grew heavy until another voice joined in. This time, deeper. Shu Kai. He had walked past the dressing rooms, intending to head straight for his car, but something made him stop. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was concern, or maybe it was the undeniable bond between two people who had shared countless hours together under bright stage lights. He heard the faint sound of muffled sobs, and without hesitation, he pushed the door open. The sight before him froze him in place. Tan Songyun, who just hours earlier had delivered lines with perfect grace and smiled for the cameras as if nothing was wrong, was crumbling. Her hands clutched her lap, her shoulders shaking as tears slid silently down her cheeks. The note sat on the vanity like an open wound, and though she tried to cover it, Shu Kai's eyes caught the sharp strokes of the message. He didn't say anything at first. He simply stepped forward, closed the door behind him, and let the silence breathe. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Songyun, who wrote that?" She shook her head quickly, avoiding his eyes. "It doesn't matter. Just leave it, Shu Kai. Please." But he couldn't. Not when he saw the way she looked, fragile, broken, carrying more than she should. He crouched down to her level, reaching for her trembling hands. "You've been holding this in for too long," he whispered. "You don't have to pretend, not with me." That was when it happened, the breakdown no one was supposed to see. The walls she had built so carefully, the armor she wore in front of the world, all of it cracked open. She leaned forward, burying her face into her hands, sobbing as Shu Kai held her shoulders firmly. "I can't do this anymore," she cried. "I can't keep pretending that I'm okay when everything feels like it's falling apart." Her voice was raw, desperate, a sound that pierced deeper than any scripted line ever could. Shu Kai didn't interrupt. He didn't try to stop the tears. He simply stayed by her side, his presence grounding her in the storm. The whispers outside grew louder as more people noticed the unusual stillness in the hallway. A few staff members exchanged glances, unsure if they should intervene. But none dared open the door. They knew that whatever was happening inside that dressing room was not meant for the world to see. Inside, the air grew heavier as Tan Songyun revealed pieces of her truth. "It's the pressure, the rumors, everything. I smile for the cameras, I laugh during interviews, but the moment I'm alone, I feel like I'm breaking. And now this note, this reminder that someone out there knows my weakness, it's too much, Shu Kai. Too much." Her confession was not just emotional, it was haunting. Whoever left that note hadn't just shaken her, they had planted a seed of fear that was now consuming her. Shu Kai listened carefully, his jaw tightening as he glanced back at the note. "Then we'll find out who wrote it," he said firmly. "And until then, you're not alone. Not anymore." His words hung in the air like a promise, a lifeline she didn't expect but desperately needed. In that moment, the dressing room became more than just a backstage space. It became a sanctuary, a place where walls crumbled and truth surfaced. The whispers outside the door would eventually spread about how Tan Songyun had cried that night, about how Shu Kai had stayed with her far longer than expected. But the raw truth of what happened in that room could never fully be captured by gossip. Because the real story wasn't about weakness, it was about being human. Tan Songyun, the star adored for her light-hearted charm, had shown the side no one was supposed to see, the vulnerability behind the smile, the fragility behind the fame, the whisper of pain behind the laughter. And Shu Kai, in that unplanned moment, had stepped into a role no script could have given him, the role of protector, confidant, and perhaps something even deeper. When they finally stepped out of the dressing room hours later, her eyes were still swollen, but her heart felt lighter. The whispers continued, but she walked with her head held higher. Because sometimes, breaking down doesn't mean you're weak. Sometimes, it means you've carried too much for too long, and the world finally sees the cracks you can't hide anymore. And that night in the dressing room, when the cameras had stopped rolling and the crew had gone home, Tan Songyun showed the world her most unfiltered truth. A truth wrapped in whispers, sealed in tears, and remembered in silence. The note was never found again. The mystery of who left it remained unsolved. But what lingered was more powerful, the memory of a breakdown that was never supposed to be witnessed, yet became the moment that redefined everything. Because sometimes, the most unforgettable stories don't happen in front of the spotlight. They happen behind closed doors, in whispered moments, in dressing rooms where walls finally come down. And for Tan Songyun, that night was the beginning of something she could never turn away from, the moment she realized that vulnerability is not her weakness, but her greatest strength. The studio was never truly silent. Even after the cameras stopped rolling, the sound of hurried footsteps, zippers closing, and muffled laughter echoed faintly in the corridors. But behind the thick wooden door of Tan Songyun's dressing room, the world felt different, hushed, heavy, as if time itself was holding its breath. The letter sat like a ghost on her vanity, its ink sharp and merciless under the dim yellow light. Not everything you hide will stay hidden. They will find out sooner or later. She had read it at least 20 times, each word carving deeper into her chest. The paper wasn't just a note, it was a threat, a reminder that even behind closed doors, someone was watching her. Her hands trembled as she lifted the letter again. It wasn't just what was written, it was how. The strokes were deliberate, almost artistic, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone meticulous, someone who wanted to be remembered. She wanted to crumple it, burn it, throw it away. But instead, she kept staring, unable to escape the weight of it. A soft creak jolted her from her spiral. She snapped her head up, eyes darting to the door. The faint shadow of footsteps lingered just outside. She froze, her pulse racing. Had someone been listening? Had they seen her cry? She pressed her palm against the mirror, staring at her reflection as if begging it to stay strong. Not now, not here, she whispered to herself. But her reflection betrayed her. The tears had already left trails down her cheeks, her mascara slightly smudged, her usual glow replaced by exhaustion. That was when the door clicked softly. "Songyun." The voice was tentative, a whisper barely audible. She spun around, startled. It was Mai, one of the younger makeup assistants. The girl peeked in, clutching a forgotten pouch of brushes, but her eyes widened when she saw her. You've been crying?" Mai asked, her tone hesitant, almost fearful. Songyun immediately reached for the nearest tissue, dabbing her cheeks with forced composure. "No, it's just allergies. Don't worry about it." Her voice cracked, betraying her. But Mai didn't leave. She lingered in the doorway, her gaze shifting toward the vanity where the mysterious note still lay in plain sight. Songyun noticed too late, her hand darting forward to cover it. "Mai, don't," she said sharply, her voice firmer than intended. The young assistant froze, startled by her tone. Then, with a hesitant nod, she backed away. But not before whispering something that sent chills through the air. "People are talking, Jie. They've noticed. You're different lately." The door shut before Songyun could reply. And just like that, the whispers grew louder, not in sound, but in weight. People were noticing. Her carefully constructed walls were starting to show cracks. She pressed both hands to her temples, squeezing her eyes shut. She couldn't afford to let anyone see her like this. Not Mai, not the staff, not even Shu Kai. But fate had other plans. The next sound she heard was unmistakable, Shu Kai's voice, low and steady, right outside the door. "Songyun." His knock was gentle, but his tone carried concern. Her heart lurched. Of all people, why him? Why now? "I'm fine," she called out quickly, but her voice was too tight, too strained. She knew he wouldn't believe it. The door creaked open anyway, slow and deliberate. And there he was, tall, composed, but with eyes that immediately softened the moment they landed on her. His expression shifted from casual to worried in an instant. The sight of her, shoulders trembling, tissue clenched in her hand, hit him harder than any scene they had acted together. This wasn't the cheerful, radiant co-star he knew. This was Tan Songyun stripped bare, vulnerable, fragile. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Silence fell, thick and unyielding. For a moment, neither spoke. He just looked at her, and she just tried not to fall apart again. But then his gaze drifted to the vanity. The note. Who left this? His voice was sharper now, protective. Songyun's eyes widened, and she quickly tried to hide it, but it was too late. He had already read the words. His jaw tightened, his hand curling into a fist. "Songyun," he said slowly, "whoever wrote this, what do they mean?" Her chest rose and fell as panic threatened to consume her. She didn't want to tell him. She didn't want to drag him into the shadows she had been fighting. But the sincerity in his eyes broke her resolve. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I don't know who it is, but they know things. Things I've tried to forget." Her tears came harder this time, her body shaking as she buried her face in her hands. Shu Kai didn't hesitate. He moved closer, crouching down until he was eye level with her. His hand hovered for a second before resting gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said softly. "Not with me here." And just like that, her walls collapsed. The sobs she had been holding back burst forth, raw and unrestrained. The sound filled the room, a heartbreaking melody of pain she had buried for far too long. Shu Kai didn't flinch. He didn't rush her. He simply stayed, grounding her in silence, his presence steady against her storm. Outside the dressing room, the whispers began again. Staff members passed by, their footsteps slowing as they heard muffled voices inside. Some exchanged knowing glances, others pretended not to notice. But the truth was clear, something was happening behind that closed door. Inside, Shu Kai finally spoke, his tone more determined now. "We'll find out who wrote that note. I won't let anyone hurt you like this." Songyun looked up at him through tear-streaked cheeks. "And if it's already too late? If they already know everything?" He shook his head firmly. "Then we face it. Together." The word together lingered in the air, heavier than any script they had performed. The dressing room suddenly felt like the center of a storm. On one side, the world that demanded perfection, and on the other, the fragile reality of two people caught in something far bigger than themselves. Songyun exhaled shakily, the weight on her chest easing ever so slightly. For the first time that night, she believed she wasn't completely alone. And though no one outside would ever know the full truth of what was spoken inside those four walls, the whispers that followed them out of that room would never fade. Because that night, behind closed doors, Tan Songyun's breakdown wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was the beginning of a story no one saw coming. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more dramatic and emotional stories about your favorite stars.